it's really great to be able to offer these classes, these virtual opportunities with our Meet the Makers series. So we did a Jasper Hill live stream cheese tasting on Monday. We have this one today. So this is a new Meet the Makers series that I'm putting together to kind of spotlight our local producers, the people that we buy from and that we love to support. So it's really awesome to see people interested in that and joining us. And I really appreciate that. If you have any other ideas for makers that you'd like to learn more about that you want me to reach out to, please shoot me an email. I'm always looking for other people to reach out to in the area to see if they want to do anything virtually with us. But with that, I will turn things over to Eleanor. And if you have questions for me, I'll be around, but I'm also going to mute and just listen along. So thank you so much. But Eleanor, take it away.
Awesome. So it is recording now. I did turn that on. We got most of your presentation, so thank you. Thanks for joining us, everybody. I'm Eleanor. I'm waving so you know which one I am. And then Garrett Huber is also with me. And Garrett is responsible for all of the cider making for Eden and does it quite a bit in the orchard as well. We're really excited to be doing this with City Market. Been a supporter for a long time. And we started making ciders in the winter of 2007, my husband and myself in our basement. And one thing led to another, and here we are today. So I'm going to share my screen. We have some pictures. We just want to give you guys a sense of, where we are, what it looks like, the orchard, how we source apples, and how we produce the ciders, and then talk specifically about the ciders that Carrie and I recommended that you bring to the tasting today. I don't know if everybody has one, but I think the most important thing with these things is they're happening at 5:30 and on, and we don't want to be getting in between you and a drink. So Carrie, I'm sorry for you, but for everybody else, we normally taste ciders dry to sweet. If you did pick up this Fruit Nature dry cider, that would be the first one we would taste. It's a champagne method cider. And it's always good to start off the evening with champagne. So crack it open, pour some for yourself, and I will share my screen and start blabbing away. Let's see, let me get this up. Okay, can everybody see that? Just like give me a thumbs up. Great, thank you. Okay, so Eden Specialty Ciders. Our mission is to make a better world through cider. What do we mean by that? Well, first of all, we work with these gorgeous apples. Aren't they beautiful? So that's just making me feel better right off the bat. But there are key components to that mission. First and foremost of all is to produce delicious ciders. We want you to just love drinking them and want to come back and drink some more and tell your friends about it. We partner with small family orchards. We have our own orchard. I'll show you all about that. And our ciders are 100% locally sourced. And we're really passionate about working with small orchards where it might not be their primary orchard, or it might be part of a diversified farm, but where we can keep the wonderful working landscape of Vermont working. So that's really what motivates us. We also want to spread regenerative growing practices. So beyond IPM and organic to holistic, thinking about how do we create a really healthy ecology around the trees so that they fight for themselves and survive. And we're trying to spread those practices among the orchards that we work with. We want to minimize our carbon footprint. And we do a lot of things locally in our community to support, with donations and donations over time and stuff. We're one of we were the first cidery in the U.S. to receive a seal of approval from Slow Food. It's the only organization where they come in and actually inspect your facility, interview your employees, talk to your suppliers and growers. And so we're really proud of that one in particular, of all the awards that we've won. And this is our team. So Garrett is, as I said, our cider maker. Alexandra does our marketing. Adam does education and direct sales. And Ben is our orchard manager. And we also have Johanna, who's our business manager, who's not, we don't have a good picture of her yet, but we're going to work on So where are we? Northeast Kingdom, is the three counties up here in the top right of the state, and I've drawn a box around this particular area and blown it up over here. And the A that you see is the farm in West Charleston that my husband and I bought in early 2007. This is an abandoned dairy farm, 150 acres, mostly woods, 30 acres of pasture, and probably never a very successful farm, really a subsistence farm. And we just started planting trees and making things in our basement. And 6 years later, we were running out of room, and we thought, well, the great thing about making cider in a basement is you don't really need heating and air conditioning, right? Wine has been made in cellars for centuries because underground is always sort of the right temperature and the right humidity. And so we were looking around, and in Newport, there was an abandoned department store on Main Street that had a lower level. It's like lower level for children's clothes and furniture. And it had a 10-foot ceiling and a freight elevator and a loading dock in the back. And so we went from being about 800 square feet underground, a little farmhouse, to almost 8,000 square feet underground, which is super cool, big green. So all of the apple processing still happens at the farm, and then once things are liquid, they come to Newport, and all of the cider production, bottling, packaging, etc., happen there. One exception to that is our cans, which we will talk about when we get to them. And Northeast Kingdom is just a very beautiful little corner. It's not as dramatic as the Greens, but it's very bucolic. It's got gorgeous lakes and hills. This is Lake Willoughby. It's 4 miles south of the orchard. A lot of it is state park. It's beautifully preserved. It's the deepest, coldest, cleanest lake in New England. And this is another lake. This is Memphremagog, so looking north from Newport. First bump is in the US, the second bump is in Canada. I like to joke, I can see Canada from our cidery. Not really Sarah Palin, but it's let me do it. And this is a picture of the farm out in West Charleston, and the little farmhouse where we started making the cider. And it looks like this a good, 5 or 6 months of the year. So we planted 1,000 trees, 2008, 2009, 2010. So they've really been bearing fruit for the past 3 to 4 years. And this is one block of the orchard. There are 3 different blocks. And you can see, there's not an herbicide strip under these trees. We mow probably only about 3 times a year. And we're not spraying any herbicides down. We don't spray commercial pesticides. We work with things like neem oil and activated microbes and liquid fish to just support a healthy ecology in the orchard. And we're particularly interested in not spraying things that will not spraying things that are antifungal that would kill the mycorrhizae fungal environment of the soil and the trees. These additional shots when we get close to harvest and the apples are looking great. There's Garrett picking. This apple in the middle is a Caville Blanc d'Hiver. That's an old, 16th century French variety, famous for pies. And apples, so it's very different from the apples that you would go to City Market to get to eat. And City Market's great. The co-ops are great because they do get some of the old heirloom varieties from people who grow them. And there are a few people who do. But in general, when you're eating it, when you're getting an apple to eat, you're looking for something that has great texture, right? You want something to bite in. It's crisp, it's juicy, you want it to explode in your mouth, juice, and to be a little sweet and tart, but doesn't need to have a whole lot of flavor. This is why Honeycrisp is so successful as an apple, because the structure of that apple just like explodes in your mouth. Everybody hates a mealy apple. And for grocery store apples, they've really narrowed the world of grocery store apples because they have to store well, they have to ship well, they have, you know, and the orchards will pick them underripe so that they can be in storage for a long time, come out of storage, sit on the shelf in the grocery store, and still have that wonderful crisp texture when you bite into them. As cider makers, we could care less about texture, right? We are all about flavor. So I want the apple, even if I'm getting a Honeycrisp to make our Honeycrisp ice cider, I want that apple to hang on the tree to the last possible moment, so that all the flavors and the sugars get developed in the apple. Um, and we work with apples that actually are, some of them are really not good to eat at all. They're pretty disgusting. They're bitter. And Carrie got to taste some of them the other day, so she knows what I'm talking about. So we think about apples on these two dimensions, acid and tannin, right? So most grocery stores would be here. They would have very low tannin, and they'd be, you know, sort of balanced between sweetness and acidity. The only ones that might be different than that would be apples that you know as baking varieties. So Granny Smith, Northern Spy, where they would be sharp. So they would have some pretty high acidity to them. And then over here, you see bittersweet and bitter sharp. Those are apples that have tannin in them. So tannin being the you know, phenolic components from woody plants, and also found in wine grapes, right in the skin. So black tea is another example of something tannic. You get that drying astringency on the side of your tongue from something tannic, and also some bitterness, which can make things refreshing. And so in apples, the tannins are actually in the flesh of the apple, right? It's a tree fruit. It's got a lot more cellulose structure in the flesh of the apple than a grape does. And so you can have a pretty bitter apple. And as you look at the names over here on the left, the sweets, so some of these are interesting heirloom varieties that have been grown in our area for a long time, like hundreds of years. Roxbury Russet is the oldest named variety of apple from Roxbury, Massachusetts in the 1640s. So somebody's been propagating that apple for 300 years, and actually, you know, getting on 400. And you say, well, I've never heard of it. Yes, well, it looks like a little brown rock, and it actually isn't that pleasant when it comes off the tree in the fall. But if you put it in your root cellar, this is before refrigeration, you could go down in January and the sugars would have continued to develop, and you'd have something sweet in an era where there wasn't a lot of access to sweet things. So it was pretty exciting at the time. And there are probably only about 20 acres of Roxbury Russet in existence. And the thing about these heirloom varieties is if they disappear, they're gone forever. Right? Apples cross-pollinate. Every seed is a genetic individual. If you plant a seed of a Macintosh, you're not going to get a Macintosh apple tree. And so the only way that you keep varieties going is to actually clone them by taking scion wood and grafting it onto another rootstock to get that same variety. So that's the key cool and fascinating things about heirloom apple varieties. So Spitzenbergs, Newtown Pippins, these are all old American varieties. Oops, a little too far on that. You'll notice as we get into the bitter apples, there's some French sounding names. So these varieties, you know, a lot of cider in North America was made from wild varieties, right? So those seeds that did get planted, most of them weren't good to eat, but you could always make cider with them. And then as cider fell out of favor at the end of the 19th century and with Prohibition, you know, there was really no interest in growing anything other than apples for people to eat. And so these tannic varieties really didn't come to the US for cider until the late 1980s. It really is pretty recently. A few sort of pioneering New England and Virginia's orchardists went and brought over scion wood to start propagating these. So they're very rare, they're very expensive. We grow some of them in our orchard, and there are a few other places around us where we can get them. But they, you know, the difference in cost between buying a leftover Macintosh out of cold storage and buying, you know, a bushel of Kingston Black is about 10 times the price. just for comparison. Here's some pictures of them. You know, they just don't look like the apples that you see. This is a russet. This is Egremont russet. It means the same thing as it does in potato land. It just means a rough skin. It's bumpy. And these are the bitter, sweet, bitter, sharp apples over here. And I don't have a very good scale here, but they're really only about 1.5 inches to 2 inches in diameter. So a lot of them are quite a bit smaller than the apples you would find in the grocery store too. And so obviously, you know, our trees only started bearing fruit about four years ago. And so we have been always buying fruit from others to make our ciders. And over the years, we've pretty much developed relationships with anybody who had interesting fruit. Scott Farm was our first apple partner. Steve Wood at Poverty Lane Orchards in New Hampshire here was one of the first people who brought those tannic apple varieties over from England and France. And we get some good tannic apples from him. And then Brad Kaler is at Windfall Orchard, has been a wonderful partner. We actually produce ciders from his apples with his brand on them. We've been doing that since 2009. So these are long-term partnerships, especially with the heirloom and tannic varieties. They're not reliable producers every year. They tend to be more biennial. So every year we're sort of looking at the harvest, what's coming in, you know, figuring out like what we're going to turn it into and so forth. So, but they can generally count on us to be there for them as a market and to give them a place to sell fruit that nobody wants to eat, for example. Let's see, I need to admit somebody. Okay. Sorry, I hope I didn't keep you waiting too long. So this is a picture of our press, and I'm going to turn it over to Garrett at this point to talk about how we actually make the stuff. Okay, so Garrett, I think I need to unshare myself and make you a host. Yes, okay, and now you should be able to share your screen.
All right, there we go. I had to unmute myself. Everybody hear me? Good? Yes. Okay. So here is our pressing setup in West Charleston. There's an elevator grinder to the left of your screen right there. It's the stainless. Basically, that takes apples up and drops them into the wooden grinder, which is right in the middle of your screen. From there, we get pumice that drops into that bin, and we move it over to our press, which is the red steel uprights. It's a hydraulic press from probably the late 1800s, early 1900s, built by the Hydraulic Press Company in Mount Gilead, Ohio. Super rare press. Another orchard cidery restored it, and in Vermont, we ended up purchasing it from them. And it's a super cool, super old, still efficient press that works really well. From there, what's not pictured is we pump it into a tote and take it off to Newport for fermentation. But yeah, we do probably in between 3,000 to 5,000 gallons on this pressing setup a year. So it works really well. Here's just a couple pictures of Ben building. They're called cheeses. So it's basically just a frame, a wooden frame that you put cloths into that filter the pumice. And as the hydraulic press pushes up against the uprights, juice flows out, but pumice stays in the cheeses. So it's a picture on the left's Ben filling the cheeses, and then it's me on the right pressing. From there, we bring it to Newport. for fermentation in the underground cidery. Fermentation usually lasts anywhere between 3 to 4 weeks to 3 to 5 months, depending on what we're fermenting. After that, we age a lot of our ciders, some of them in stainless, some of them in oak. On the bottom right-hand corner, we have basically barrels of Kingston Black. Those are neutral oak puncheons that we'll age some of our ciders for kind of refining some of those tannins and giving it a little bit more oxidative character over time. Sometimes aged for, anywhere between 3 months to, some of our stuff ages 7 years. I think we might release something that's 8-year age this year. So, yeah. And then the upper right-hand corner is our manual bottler. Pretty easy. It's just a gravity flow bottler. And I believe that was a pet nat from either a year or 2 years ago. But nice pet nat cider. And here's just our lineup of all the different ranges of ciders we make. Anything from ice cider to rosé to our smaller batch cellar series in bottles, and then our cans. So when we think about making cider, and when you pick up a cider, here's some of the information we always provide on our stuff is what apple varieties is it made from and where are they grown. It's an important question. It definitely dictates a lot of the flavor. Apple varieties really, as Eleanor was mentioning, really vary from sharp to sweet to bitter sharp and bittersweet. And then the location of where they're grown. There's definitely a terroir instinct to apples, right? Something grown in New Hampshire might be different than something grown in Vermont. There's definitely a terroir aspect to that. When were they harvested and pressed? This is super important. We press everything at harvest. Therefore, it's not coming out of cold storage where there can be problems in cold storage, or varietal character might have gotten lost from aging in cold storage. We're pressing right at harvest or within probably anywhere between 1 to 2 months after harvest. How much alcohol is in it? We don't really manipulate our ciders. We don't add water or basically change the alcohol too much other than our cryo concentration process. If it's sweet, how did it get sweet? We usually only use natural sweeteners, meaning it's either cryo concentrated or we use ice cider. And I'll get to that in a minute. If it's fizzy, how did it get fizzy? We usually utilize natural carbonation. We do a few things that are artificially carbed, but it's pretty important. Natural carbonation kind of lends itself to tinier bubbles and better mouthfeel, I think. And I'll talk about Brut Nature. So this is our Brut Nature. It is a blend of bitter sharp, bittersweet, and heirloom apples. What's special about this is it's method champenois, meaning it gets conditioned, and then after it's conditioned in the bottle, each bottle gets hand disgorged. It's certainly a lot of work, but it's certainly worth it as well. Like I was saying, with the natural carbonation, it's very fine bubbles and it has a lot of great mouthfeel. I think I have a video of it going next of me just for fun disgorging in the orchard. I'll play that. Basically what we're doing is we're removing the yeast from the bottle. So you do get a clear cider from it. It results in a little bit of a cleaner cider than something that still is on the lees. So our newest releases are cans. The first one is Deep Cut. That one is kind of inspiration of a hazy, dry cider. The inspiration from that comes kind of a hazy IPA. It's not hopped or anything like that. It's all apples. And we used a ton of bittersweet varieties, so things high in tannin, and fermented that cider at our production facility in Newport, and ended up blending it in with some Macintosh and Empire, and we left the cider unfiltered to give it that kind of hazy look to it. It also has 0 grams residual sweetness, and it's pasteurized as well. The other can is our Peak Bloom. So this can we have been basically producing for a few years now. It got rebranded this year, and it is a pumice fermented cider over Dabinett pumice, meaning, so what we did was we fermented it like red wine. Basically, we took that Dabinett, which is a bittersweet variety with a ton of tannin and aromatics, and fermented Macintosh and Empire on the skins of it. I think we have a picture of it, of us doing that. After we pumice fermented it, we had it filtered and blended it with its own special ice cider for a little bit of residual sweetness and aromatics and acid. So there's I don't know if that's oh, it is a video. So that'd be called like cap management. Basically, we're punching down the cap of that risen pumice. So basically what's underneath is juice, and in between the juice and pumice layer is a bunch of CO2. So basically we're releasing that CO2, wetting the cap of that. So basically no mold or no vinegar grows on top. As long as we can keep that pumice in contact with the juice, we can have a safe fermentation. Our third product is Rosé. This is based on our cryoconcentration process. So I'll explain cryoconcentration. So basically in December and January, we will press a bunch of juice for ice cider and put it out on our pad when it's like below 20 degrees during the day, and usually negatives at night. After like 4 to 6 weeks, we'll bring those containers inside to start melting. Our first pull off of the totes after they start melting, our first, I don't know, maybe 25 to 50 gallons is usually super, super sweet. That usually goes to ice cider. We have one other pull before that. It's Orleans. And then our third kind of pull and blending is Imperial 11 Rosé Base. It's a blend of heirloom apples. So it's concentrated to 17 to 19 percent sugar before it's fermented to 11% alcohol. And then we blend it with red currant and ice cider. And this is one of the only products we do carbonated in our bright tank. It's a super nice, light, slightly tannic, Provençal styled rosé. Just a good, fun drinker.
We originally made this because I love Provençal rosés, and I just wanted to see what I could make that would be close enough to that you might not notice. Really, if you pour this, I don't know if anybody has a sample of it. If you pour it and you were tasting it and nobody told you it was a cider, you would think it was just some interesting rosé wine from someplace strange like Vermont.
It definitely does. Yeah, the red currant really, is a great addition to the heirloom apples. There, you're really getting a lot of that kind of earthiness and tannin, and dryness to it. It's really great cider.
It's one of the top 5 rosé ciders on Untapped too, so it's got a following.
Yeah. So ice cider. I kind of just explained the process, but yeah. So like Honeycrisp is made up from 100% Honeycrisp apples. It's like I said, pressed in December into 275 gallon IBC totes and put outside when it's below 20 degrees during the day and negatives at night. After 4 to 6 weeks, we harvest the concentrate, just slowly warming up our barn and slowly letting it melt and just watching what melts. It's concentrated to around 36% sugar, 36% sugar, and then fermented to about 10% alcohol or 15 to 18% residual sugar. Definitely a very nice dessert wine you can enjoy with a cheese plate. We make a whole wide array of different types of ice cider. So
one of my favorite things over the years has been to be at we used to do the St. John's Way Farmers Market for 9 years, and people would come by and they go, "Oh, I really like sweet wine." And be like, "I know, neither do I. Here, taste this." And just the look of, "Oh, it's not that bad. This is great." And I think what really makes a sweet wine wonderful and why people have them and why some of the greatest wines in the world are sweet wines is when you have that balance of acidity and that backbone of acidity so that the finish is a tart finish and not a cloyingly sweet finish. And then, if you've got some complexity to the flavors and some age, right? Sweet wines can age better than just about anything else. And so explain this picture, Garrett, and then talk about the 8-year-old thing you mentioned earlier.
All right. So yeah, this is, normal Vermont winter. So we have all these IBC totes. And so I was explaining, this is the freezing process in December and January and February. There's been, I think, plowing some snow off. It's a pretty common occurrence. You got to keep the pad clean to drive the forklift out to pick these things up. So I think right there, we've got to have at least, 60 to 80 totes out there. This is what
we've done. I think the most we ever froze at was 26,000 gallons, but it's usually about 20,000 gallons a year getting frozen.
Yeah. You end up with, maybe recouping. It depends on what we make each year. It could be 35% recouped versus, in a year we're making more rosé, it could be 50%. So it depends on what the year brings. So yeah, it's cold. And then the 8-year age barrel thing is we're not sure what we're going to call it yet, usually we have at least 8 years ago we had a extra ice cider base that was purposely made for blending that didn't really fit in the blend, and so Eleanor and Albert had put it away in a barrel for, 5 or 6 years, 7 years at some point. And after tasting through it 5 or 6, 7 years later, it was like, wow, this is pretty amazing. It's like caramel, molasses, and sweet and acidic and ton of apple character after 7 years, 6, 7 years. And basically this thing evolved into something called Falstaff, which is sold in these little 375 quart bottles, and just super awesome aged ice cider that just is unlike anything you've ever had before. But we release a barrel a year of it. I think last year we released Queen Mab, which was the barrel aged 7-year new ice cider, and that's won a ton of awards. And this year we're releasing another barrel, and who knows what, how it'll be. So we're still working on that. So it'll be interesting.
It'll be Shakespearean in one way or another.
Okay. I get caught up with the name, but it's the barrel aged thing we do every year. So it's something to look forward to, and super small batch, single barrel every year. So, but yeah, thank you. Thanks for playing along. If there's any questions, feel free to ask.
I have a question. How many more barrels of it can you have left in terms of years? Like, can you go up to from the original batch that was set aside that you've released every year? Is there like 2 barrels left with, so you'll get to 10 years and then you'll be done?
Yeah, no, it's not one batch. It was, overflow from blending. You always get to the point where like you filled the tank and there's a little bit left. so it's really only about 1 barrel a year, and it's just been it's happened every year. Or I guess 2012 we had 2 barrels, and then we didn't have anything in 2013. It's very random, and we didn't know it was at the time. We didn't know it was going to turn into something wonderful. And every once in a while, Albert would look at me and say, "Oh, we're doing Northern Spy. I need a barrel. Can I just empty the shit out of that?" No, don't, just leave it. Let's get another barrel. But we've got a 2014, right? And
Oh,
yeah. So now we're being a little more deliberate.
Yeah. It's
on the side.
Yeah.
A lot of what we do is a result of happy accidents or just unintentional things that led to good things. All the unintentional things that lead to bad things you don't ever see.
So can I ask a question?
Oh, sorry. Ryan asked a question. Chat on some of the favorite pairings, perfect time of the holiday next week. Yes. So let's talk a little bit more about the and jump in, Garrett, too, and your favorite things. Like to me, the Brute Nature is like perfect dinner cider. It's got a balance of all 4 of those types of apples. So it's got some tannin, it's got some acidity, it has enough sugar from this primary, secondary fermentation to have body from the alcohol, and the beautiful bubbles. It's champagne is very food friendly. You can drink it with a lot of different foods, and I feel like the Brute Nature is the same thing. Everything from oysters to turkey to steak frites. It just easy to drink, and the nice little half bottles that you guys have at City Market, one of those is like perfect for one person. You drink it with your meal. It's less alcohol than white wine, and you can, and less calories, and you can go back to work afterwards if you have to. So it's my jam. And then the rosé is also great with turkey. So cider and turkey are way better than wine and turkey, right? Everybody always has a hard time pairing wines with turkey at Thanksgiving. I mean, not only is cider sort of a good pairing as historically that would have been it, but it's just the flavor is just right. Apples are a good part of the harvest and what you think about celebrating the harvest with, and it's great. Pork is the other one. Right, yeah, because historically apples and pork go well, and so cider and any form of pork is great too. Vegetarian dishes, fantastic. Cheesy things, wonderful. Curry, great pairing with cider. Not so great with wine. So there are a lot of things where cider is actually a better pairing than grape wines. And then we talked about the ice cider. My thing is like, you get to the end of the meal, you want something a little bit sweet, but you don't want to have a whole dessert. Just have a little glass of ice cider. It's such a nice way to end the meal. You can put a little bit of cheese with it. But if you are going to pair it with dessert, things that are creamy and cakey, ice cream, creme brulee, bread pudding, cheesecake, pound cake, are wonderful. Obviously, the classic apple tart, pear tart, walnut tart, things like that. And then like the stupidly delicious thing is salted caramel. So anything that's got salted caramel on it is great with ice cider. Ryan and Garrett, anything that you love to share?
You pretty much ice cider and apple pie. I know it like breaks the rules of like, acid and acid kind of sweet, but putting a little ice cider in your apple pie is like amazing. And then drinking the ice cider, buy one bottle for cooking and one bottle. It's amazing.
And that's the other thing about ice cider that's super cool is just it's you can't make it other places, right? We talk about Vermont being the Napa Valley of cheese because we have more cheesemakers per capita than any other place, and we have more brewers per capita. We have more ice cider producers, full stop. You don't even have to say per capita than any other state because it's such a limited climate where you can produce it. So I mean, the vast majority of producers of ice cider are across the border in southern Quebec. But we've got our fair share. Yes, all of Jasper Hill cheeses and all of Eden Ciders are happy partners. Yep. We've been doing some virtual tastings too, where people can kind of order a kit from us and a kit from them and do things together.
Amy, I know you had a question, I think. If you want to go ahead and unmute and ask that, or type it in the chat, whatever's easier, go for it.
Oh, yeah, I guess I was thinking when I heard the ice cider, I was thinking about ice wine where they harvest the grapes once the temperature drops and they're still on the vine. So I was just curious, I guess what happens, how is it different with ice cider and ice wine, and really what happens to the mixture once it's outside in the cool?
Yeah, so apples are different from grapes, right? So it's a much woodier, starchier fruit, and most of them fall off the tree when they're ripe. They don't hang on. There are a couple of varieties that will hang: Portland, Golden Russet, Spartan. And the other thing that happens is because it's a very woody, starchy fruit, if it's hanging on the tree and it freezes, the cellulose structure in the apple breaks down, and you have decomposition happening in ways that doesn't happen in a grape. If you've frozen a grape in your freezer, it makes this nice little frozen grape you can throw in a drink, which is really cool. If you've frozen a lettuce leaf by accident, it's kind of gross. It just sort of dissolves. And that's sort of the issue with apples when you freeze them. So we actually have made an awesome ice cider that is cryo extracted. So from frozen apples that Garrett went and picked at our friends at Heath Orchard just across the border. And it's wonderful, but it doesn't taste a whole lot like apple. It tastes more like white grape and apricot and peach. So when we're working with these really wonderful old heirloom varieties, we really want you to taste them. Right? We're paying so much money for them. We want you to experience the flavors that they have. And the cryo concentration process is, does that much better. So we basically are pressing the apple juice, putting it in those containers. It's like creating a grape with a plastic skin, and putting that outside to freeze. And then as the H2O, the water molecules freeze, right, you have less and less that's liquid, and that liquid is getting sweeter and sweeter. And so when it's 80% frozen, the liquid has about 35–36% sugar in it. And it's concentrating not only the sugars, but all the flavors, all the acids, everything. As you look at those containers, when they first go outside, they're uniformly the same color. But over the cycle of sort of 4 to 6 weeks, as we might go down to -35, might come up to +20, back down. That's like a 55-degree temperature variation, all below freezing. And that up and down really helps separate out the H2O that's freezing, and ice floats, right? So that's moving up, and all the sugars and flavors that are denser and sort of trickling down. And so by the end of the 4 to 6 weeks, it's much paler on top and darker at the bottom when you look at those containers. And so you really, you can make this in a freezer, but you don't get the same impact of having it just go through this natural up and down outdoors. And also, we're not like spending the energy, right? It's free. Thank you, nature.
Great, thank you. Also, quick question, has the pandemic affected your working with farmers in Canada at all, and how are you dealing with that?
Oh gosh. We had a terrible time getting the apples from, so Heath Orchard is this wonderful 6-acre family orchard. It's right across the border that grows lots of different varieties. And in 2015, we knew about them, but we didn't really know them very well. In 2015, they were hit by hailstorms 3 times in a row. And we just reached out and said, hey, can we help? Can we buy some apples that you can't sell to people now? And so that started the relationship. And when we went to pick up the apples, we looked, and on the edge of their orchard were these 3 crabapple trees that had amazing crab apples on them. They were Kerr crab apples, which is a Manitoban variety. And we were like, and can we pick those too? And so we've made sort of some small batch stuff with their Kerr crab apples. So this year we were like, it would be really nice to have some more Kerr crab. And Garrett went through the most unbelievable hoops normally we would just drive across and pick them up in our pickup truck and bring them back. And this year we had to find a trucker who thought they could do it, but then it turned out they couldn't, and they had to find some other trucker. So long-winded answer, it was not easy. And we probably, if we're still in this situation next fall, we would not do it again, which is a shame.
Hi, Eleanor, it's Ryan.
Hi, Ryan. Thanks so much for joining us this evening.
So happy to be here. Eleanor, about 24 of us went through the certified cider professional course. The last couple of weeks, we were all taking our time taking the test, which I passed. Would you be proud?
Awesome.
But one of the questions on the exam I got wrong, kind of really fired me up, I have to tell you. It said, throughout the course, it says, apples can be grown all over the world. But the question was, where should they be grown? And the correct answer was the same as wine, between the 30 and 60 degree latitudes. But the course actually talks about the fact that apples can be grown outside of that latitude. I'm just curious, was the course kind of wrong in that question, or was that a trick question, or should I, voice a complaint up to the top?
So that's interesting, and I'm feeling embarrassed because I am on the board of the American Association of Cider Makers, American Cider Association, but I've not been involved in the development of the course, and I would have gotten that wrong too, especially as someone who grows apples in Zone 3B at the 45th parallel. So yeah, I don't know. I'll support you.
Thanks. I found it strange as well. But anyway, so thanks for being here. This is great. I love listening to you talk about pairings with food, because I know you're so good at it. So I know there's another question about pairing techniques, and I could listen to you for hours talk about how you pair with food.
Oh well, it's at the end of the day, it's just like what you like to eat. But for anybody who hasn't tried cider with dinner or whatever you're having for dinner, try it, because it'll probably go better than you think.
Yeah, I put a question in the chat, kind of just for everybody's sake, for people who did pick up the ones that you suggested. Do you have any? I know you said, you gave us the hint of always taste dry to sweet when you're doing a tasting. Do you have any other tips and techniques? Is it like a wine tasting? Should you do anything different? What notes should you be picking up? I'd love to know more about that process, because I've done we did the Shelburne Vineyard one, and I learned how to taste wine because I didn't know how to taste wine. And I'd love to know if there's techniques for tasting cider that are different.
Not really. It's really the same thing. I mean, it's apple wine, right? So thank you. Yes, it's to the extent that you've been doing wine tastings, cider is the same thing. So you want to, look at it. Looking at it can tell you a lot about what the cider is. Is it clear? Is it cloudy? Is it sparkling? Is it still? And then, hopefully it's got some nice kind of golden color to it. If it's super pale, then I'm like a little suspicious. And if it's, really gray, then that's kind of suspicious too. But it should have a nice pale golden color. Or if it's an ice cider, you want a deep golden color. And then tasting notes, techniques for people to pick up a cider, you suggested. Yeah. So next thing you're gonna do is smell it, right? The aromas, and then taste it and think about how to attack the middle of the palate and the finish, what you're left with. So those are always the things to think about. Most ciders are, I think because so much of the cider that's in the market is made from grocery store varieties and often has some kind of sweetness added to it or other fruits, that's a little different, so the things that I talk about in terms of tasting are like wine are more relevant to the ciders that are made by people who come at it from a wine point of view. So us and Fable Farm and Tin Hat and Windfall and Safa and Jackberry on their Lost and Found series. Where we're really trying to express the quality of the fruit in the glass. And so then I'm asking people to take, put your nose in. You should smell something that has something to do with apple in the aroma. And when you taste it, you should also get apple character, but not like apple juice, right? I think a lot of people want to think about picking up a thing of cider and they want it to taste like apple juice, right? But when you pick up a glass of Pinot Noir, if you really love wine and you're into Pinot Noir, you really don't want it to taste like grape juice. You want fruit character. I get really disappointed when I taste wine that has, it's got acid and tannin and balance and body, but it has no fruit flavor. That's really disappointing to me. And so in our ciders, I think one of the things our brand stands for, we make so many different kinds of ciders, but one of the things our brand always stands for is you will taste the fruit in this cider. Even if it's completely dry, like the Brut Natura, you're still getting apple character, right? So, and the tannin helps with that. So your tasting notes are, there's a classic. Ryan, you should do this because you've been through the course, right? There's the fruit character components that you're looking for. So is it green apple? Is it dried apple? Is it baked apple? Is it apple saucy? Does it have stone fruit characters to it? Peaches, pears, not pears, apple, peaches, apricots, things like that. So they're sort of like what kinds of fruitiness are you tasting? Even tart cherry, something that you can taste in a cider sometimes. And then there's sort of the grassy notes. There's the phenolics, which can be everything from the woodiness to might have a little band-aid depending upon how much funk the cider makers let get in there. Might be a little horse blanket, a little leather. I mean, one of the things about these tannic apples is they have a very distinctive character if there's a lot of them, where you do get a little of those phenolics, the sort of horse blankets, a little bit of what people would refer to as funk. I'm not excited about vinegar. I feel like that's taking away from the flavor. And if you have sort of too much, some things that have gone wrong and you get like rotten eggs, that's no good either. So we try to avoid those. There are other faults that can go wrong that are similar to what's in wine. Not a huge fan of Brettanomyces in cider. And even malolactic can be pretty awful sometimes. So a little bit in balance can make something complex and interesting, especially if you don't have complexity in the apple varieties. But in general, we're looking for the fruit to give you complexity, and that's why we work with all these fantastic varieties. And then the finish, is it acid over bitter? Is it more bitter than acid? Does it leave a pleasant, nice long feeling in your mouth, or does it sort of just drop off and disappear? Things to look for. We're always interested in having making sure that the last thing that you taste is something that makes you want to come back and have some more.
Awesome. Love it. What's your favorite? Do you have a favorite? Can you pick?
Oh, well, the Brut Nature, as I said, is my jam. That's my go-to. But I'm also really loving this guy because it's lower. It's 6.2%. It's 0 grams, and it tastes like peach iced tea. I just love it.
And I'm curious, for those of you that have joined us that did purchase the ciders that we recommended for the tasting, does anybody have a favorite of the 4? I don't know if anybody wants to pipe in, and I can't see if anybody's trying them because everybody's got their videos turned off, but if you tried them tonight, I'd be curious to know your thoughts. Amy says the deep cut is really good.
Totally crushable.
Awesome. Ryan says the same thing. Deep cut's killer, very balanced. Yeah, I know that when I've had the deep cut, I really like it. And you can really taste that sort of real cider freshness at harvest sort of thing. I love that. But yeah, we have this last half hour available for if anybody has any questions, anything else they want to chat with Eleanor and Garrett about, learn more. This is your chance to deep dive into their brains and pick their brains for any sort of cider orchardy knowledge. But we have plenty of time, so get those questions out. If you want to type them into the chat, we can do that. Or if you want to unmute and ask them in person, that is also fine.
Thanks, Ivy. I'm with you. I think the Brut Nature for holiday in particular, just because it's so beautifully champagne-y. That's great. Great. Well, I certainly don't want to force people to stick around on a Friday night.
Yeah, exactly. If you do have questions after this as well, you can feel free to email me and I can pass them on to Eleanor and Garrett. I'm happy to do that. We're happy to do that. But I also want to plug our remaining virtual classes. So we've gone virtual, given everything that's going on. So we do have tons of great December virtual live streams up, and we're going to be hopefully continuing our Meet the Maker series with some more people. So definitely keep an eye on our class calendar. But if nobody else has any questions or comments, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Eleanor and Garrett for popping on tonight. This has been, like I said, really fun to be able to still offer things like this to our community in a time where it can feel very isolating. So this felt like kind of just hanging out with everybody and tasting ciders together. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me and I will hopefully get the recording from Eleanor and set it out so that people can catch up on anything that they missed. But if no one else has any questions, we will say a big thank you and say good night.
Thank you. Thanks so much for doing this series, Carrie. You're awesome.
Okay. Oh, thanks. Yeah, I love highlighting things and I'm a big cider fan, so this was really exciting for me as well. But thank you, everybody, and have a good weekend, and we'll say bye.
Have a good night.